Hello everybody and welcome to a very special edition of NBL Overtime. Big announcement this morning, NBL v NBA for the third consecutive year. Liam Santa-Maria and Mark Worthington here joining myself, Cam Luke. And if you've missed the news and the announcement only moments ago, we will see for the third year NBL teams head to the US and take on the NBA teams in their pre-season. We will see Utah and Adelaide go at it again. The New Zealand Breakers will head to Memphis to take on the Grizzlies and to Oklahoma City to take on the Thunder. And California is where Melbourne United will be to take on the Sacramento Kings and the Los Angeles Clippers. As always, as big announcement as it is, it gets us excited each and every year. Jeremy Loeliger, the CEO of the NBL. Congratulations, mate.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's really exciting, and as you say, it's the third year in a row now, but each year it's just as exciting, and we're really pleased to have another 5 games coming up for the pre-season. It's not our pre-season, sadly. We're going to have to work with some schedule constraints there, but it's equally exciting as it has been the previous years, building on that relationship.
We'll get to the dates and many questions that the boys have you about how this whole thing does work out, but you make a really good point. This is the third year and the excitement hasn't been dulled at all. We've seen teams play, of course, a few more teams last year, a little bit wound down this year, but the excitement from basketball fans in Australia is at fever pitch, and the NBL must continue to say that you're doing the right thing by continuing to do this.
Well, we keep getting invited back, which is a good sign, so that's promising. We've got some new teams this time round as well, and starting to build on some rivalries. Utah and Adelaide is an exciting one. I think there's a mention of calling it the Ingles Cup, which would be a nice touch, I think.
Happy Valley Cup.
The Happy Valley Cup, there we go. And then having New Zealand over there with RJ Hampton taking on the likes of Russell Westbrook, that's going to be an exciting matchup. And I think, Australians will be salivating at the prospect of seeing more of these NBL teams in the NBA pre-season.
How do you come up with who talks to who? Do you talk to Adam Silver directly, or do you talk to the clubs now? How has that all panned out?
Yeah, I just pick up the phone to the commissioner and say, how are we going to roll this year? No, it's not quite that informal. There's still an air of formality about it, but it has certainly progressed from the initial time that we explored the possibility of NBA pre-season games, where we were certainly feeling one another out and figuring out how we make the logistics work. Year 2, everything worked much more fluidly. This year, the NBA were great in saying, well, now you can start to have some of those conversations more directly with clubs. Just make sure that you keep us in the loop and we'll work with you on scheduling. And it's a really robust conversation now between all of the main stakeholders, and I think that's helping it evolve to the next level.
Let's stay on the relationship between the NBL and the NBA for a second. What does this say about that relationship, and how has that developed over the last couple of years?
It's a good point. I think this is the public-facing component of that evolving relationship, but there's also a lot happening behind the scenes. A number of our staff members, including myself, have been over to NBA HQ in New York in the last little while just to talk about ideas, compare what we're doing in different aspects of the game. We're continuing to learn a lot. Our head of content and digital was over at NBA headquarters recently, learning again as to how they best use their technology and whether or not there's anything we can take from that. Sometimes the economies aren't quite the same, and therefore you need to blur the edges a little bit in terms of how we deploy what it is that they're doing. But we're constantly learning from the best. We look up to our big brother with admiration, and this is just the public-facing component of what is a much stronger relationship.
It's a super exciting series. Congratulations on pulling it off once again. I'm excited that we've got some teams that haven't been involved before, Sacramento and Memphis. How do you determine the matchups? Which NBL teams are going to go? Which NBA teams are going to be involved?
I'd be lying if I said we had a huge amount of say in terms of which NBA teams were involved. That may change as time goes on, because now we're organising these games earlier and earlier ahead of each pre-season. And we're already starting to have very early conversations about the following pre-season. Now, we're told that NBA clubs tend to start locking in their pre-season games between 12 and 18 months before they happen.
Right.
Whereas we've really only been used as gap filler in the past. Certainly in that first year, it was, hey, we need someone to plug in here, and that was only going to be one game in the initial year against Utah, it was. But that has snowballed into something much more now, and NBA teams are actually asking to play against NBL teams.
Wow.
Now, as I said, we're not yet going out and hand-picking those matchups. I don't think we're going to be anytime soon, but I do think that there will be much greater scope for flexibility going forward. In terms of picking the NBL teams, there are some interesting relationships there that we're looking to play on, and there are also some limitations around which teams did and didn't want to travel. Both Perth and Sydney are good examples of teams who travelled to the pre-season last year. They've decided this year that they're 100% focused on the beginning of the NBL season. You can understand Will Weaver starting at the Sydney Kings at a new club with a new team. He's laser locked on performance for Game 1, Round 1. I think Trevor Gleeson at the Wildcats probably has as great a public expectation of any club in the NBL because of their continued success. So you can understand that also, but there are also teams salivating the opportunity to go over. So Utah and Adelaide, we're playing up that rivalry. New Zealand and OKC, there's a really strong relationship there between those two clubs. And Melbourne, having finished second, well, they were given priority after Perth were given the first opportunity.
So in season, which was how it was in the first year, last year was in pre-season, which might have made it a bit easier for the NBL clubs on what you just mentioned. Has that at all complicated you from a domestic point of view when it comes to the fixturing and trying to work out the best way to make it work?
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
It's been a logistical nightmare trying to make sure that this works in everybody's favour. We certainly didn't want to turn down the opportunity just because it happened to be a couple of games or a couple of weeks into the NBL season, because it is such an important opportunity for us to capitalise on. At the same time, it's why we've chosen to send just 3 teams to play the 5 games, because otherwise the scheduling of the NBL season would have been near on impossible. I think trying to fit 28 games into 19 weeks is challenge enough already. But yes, we will make it work.
I'm not sure how often you watch NBL Overtime, Jeremy, but I occasionally dream big and swing Babe Ruth style. As that continuing relationship with the NBA continues to evolve, and I'm not suggesting it'll be next year, but has it been at all raised that a team will come here in their pre-season?
Has been raised by us several times.
And how was it?
How was it received?
Yeah.
Not all that favourably.
Okay, cool. The players probably want to travel. They'd love to be here.
It's 2 very different conversations with the NBA club and the NBA. The clubs are very, very keen to come to Australia. They'd love to come and play a game in front of a big Australian audience here. They know how passionate the fan base is here, and they know that their players would love to come and play a game in Australia. They're playing pre-season games in other parts of the world. Why not Australia? Reality is, relatively small population compared to, say, India or China. Very long way to travel. Although they've got chartered jets, I'm sure they can do it in reasonable comfort. And the time that it takes. Yeah, that's right. It's a very congested pre-season for them these days. So we'll keep working on them.
It's been a big off-season for the NBL as far as getting exposure out there, with RJ Hampton obviously doing it on the jump, on get up, and then LaMelo on the jump. With New Zealand going over to play Memphis and OKC, has there been more traction, and because people want to know what RJ Hampton's going to be like against the pros, considering instead of the Adelaide and the Melbourne series?
I think if I was to predict which games were going to rate the best in the US, I suspect it'll be the New Zealand games, because everyone will want to see what RJ actually brings against NBA pros. And I think it'll be great for us in terms of being able to measure where he was at the beginning or prior to an NBL season and where he is at the end of an NBL season.
Illawarra's not in this mix at the moment. Were they close so they could get the same exposure for LaMelo and probably Aaron Brooks as well, for that matter, being a seasoned vet and now plying his trade in another country? Yeah,
look, I think the Hawks have made some really bold moves in terms of their roster this year, and it's an exciting team. I'd love to see them participating in this NBA pre-season. Reality is that these 3 teams were locked in fairly early. As I said, we've needed to limit it to 3 for practical reasons. Part of me sort of wishing that maybe I had slotted Illawarra in there earlier in the piece. Had we known that LaMelo was coming, I'm sure the NBA would have been suggesting that maybe Illawarra come over and play as well. Don't know.
You mentioned the scheduling and it being inside our season and whatnot. I will say this. The last 2 champions in the NBL went and played NBA games. And the first one, Melbourne, that was in the season. Played Adelaide, went over, played OKC, came back, and then they went on to win the title. And I think there's something to be gained from that trip in terms of building as a club. Perth getting smacked by Utah, and then bouncing back against Denver, I think that catapulted them into the season last year.
Whether it's a reality check and makes you pull your socks up a little bit, whether it's a confidence booster because you came so close, I think there's huge amounts of upside in going over there and starting the season against probably the toughest competition that you'll have all year. It's certainly an interesting one, and maybe after doing this for 15, 20 years, we'll be able to do some statistical analysis and there'll be some merit in that. It's probably a bit early to tell.
Here's the statistical analysis I want to do. We've got to get a win. It's time for us to get a win over one of these NBA teams. We have been close 5 times, I feel. Melbourne, OKC, obviously 1 point. New Zealand lost to Phoenix by 5 last year. Perth went down by single digits to Denver. Adelaide, it was a single-digit game in the 4th quarter in Utah. It ended up being a blowout, but that was a close game in 3/4 time. And Sydney versus the Clippers, we were all on the edge of our seat because that was a single-digit game for most of that 4th quarter. I've been thinking about those matchups. I've been thinking about these matchups for this series. In all of those close games, the NBL team has had a perimeter guy who was an NBA level scorer. So it was Casper Ware, Corey Webster had 27, Cotton had 30 plus, Sobey and Randall both had 25. Do we have those guys on these squads? Like for Melbourne, I think Mallow Trimble and Chris Goulding puts them in that mix. We know Corey Webster can be that guy. Adelaide may be the question. Which one of these matchups do you guys think we actually have the best chance of getting a win?
Memphis, New Zealand.
Webster.
I think Webster, and you're in China, NBL, of course, the team last week against China and played exceptionally well. And we spoke about it. And the fact is that when he's up and confident, and you've called for him to be a starter this year, same as Finn Delaney, and if he's feels like he's the alpha male on that team, that's when he plays his best basketball. We saw that last year when he had all those points and gave them a sniff in that game. I think if you look at it, I think Utah are going to be really, really, really good in the NBA year with some acquisitions they've made.
Rudy Gobert is the problem for us. There.
Most definitely is. Then if you look at, and look, they've got Mike Conley now running as point guard. Not to, you know,
they've got Joe Ingles. They've got Joe Ingles.
Utah are a really good team. If you look at these teams, Utah are going to be the best of the team, I think, in an NBA season. But I think Memphis is the one if they get going.
Jeremy, who do you think?
Yeah, New Zealand, Memphis, Melbourne, Sacramento is an interesting one as well. And I've forgotten the order, whether or not they play the Clippers first or the Kings first. But I think if
they'll
Melbourne
play the Clippers first.
Yeah, see, I think if Melbourne are playing the Kings second, it's always the first quarter in which the NBL teams struggle. And there's a reason for that. You're adjusting to the extra length of the players. You're adjusting to the additional dimensions of the court. Both the three-point line and the length and breadth of the court is actually different. And that always seems to take them 12 minutes, and then the last 3 quarters are pretty competitive. I think if they've had a game under their belt already, they've made that adjustment. If they can get out there and be competitive from the first tip with the Kings, I reckon they're a chance.
As basketball fans, we are desperate for that win, as Liam just spoke about. But as a governing body, how important is a win? Like, if we go 5, 6, 7 years into this thing and the NBL team doesn't get a win, does that one hurt the brand at all? And 2, does it hurt the relationship with the NBA that after all these games you haven't been able to snag one?
I don't know that. I think the expectation is always that the NBA team is going to win, and so I don't think it can do any damage to the brand or to the competition. But certainly, flip side of the coin is that it does do a huge amount for our credibility as a league if we can sneak a win.
Yeah, well, because we've been super competitive in all those games I just said, but it would be so good to pull off a W, wouldn't it?
I think it's going to be the Sacramento game myself, especially coming off the Clippers game. I can just imagine Patrick Beverley being all up inside of Mallow Trimble and giving him the reality check that he needs of, okay, this is what an elite defender looks like. It gets no easier when he goes to Sacramento with Fox, but I think they'll find a way to score a little bit freer against Sacramento than what they will against the Clippers.
I think it's going to be fun watching Joey Wright and that Adelaide team go back up against Utah because, like I said, it was an 8-point game at 3/4 time, and I think there's a little bit of... There was some frustration, certainly for Joey, that game ended up being a 30-point game because it didn't represent how competitive they were. And Eric Griffin and his athleticism back in that arena after playing with Utah in the Summer League, that's going to be fun.
I think on top of that, their defensive style of play this year will be interesting. Like, obviously Utah in that 4th quarter got whatever they wanted. now that he's going to have a more defensive-orientated group to go against him. I think that's just going to be all sorts of exciting. But I do agree with you that I think Utah are going to be the big emergers in the West, barring Kawhi going to the Lakers at the moment. But what they've done this preseason definitely puts them in contention for the Western Conference.
Joey certainly will have done his homework on the last Utah game, and I'm sure will have come up with a strategy for combating that fourth quarter resurgence from the Jazz. But how do you overcome Rudy Gobert? We all know that was the challenge for them. Is there someone who can shut down the Rudy Gobert show?
And they're the squad I'm not sure has that scorer, Adelaide. They had Sobey. He's in Brisbane now. I'm not sure if they have someone who can, on the perimeter, DJ and Harry Froling and these guys inside, Eric Griffin, but you need someone on the perimeter who can shake and bake and give you 25.
Before I do let you go, and thank you, it's a huge announcement. From the outside looking in, we talk so much about legitimising the league and 15 Australians in the NBA and, of course, with the Next Stars program. But from a conversation, from an administration point of view, are you noticing it's different from where it was in what have been 2-3 years ago compared to where it is today?
Oh, absolutely. I think I'd be pretty concerned if I was looking back and saying that we're in the same state that we were in 2-3 years ago, because it was in a pretty bad place 3-4 years ago.
Yep.
I think it's come a long way. I think we've still got a long way to go, but certainly the quality of the competition is better than it's ever been. The competitiveness is better than it's ever been. I think of the last 4 seasons, we've had 3 of the most competitive seasons on record. The fact that I can go to just about any country in the world now that plays professional basketball and they recognise that the NBL is on a massive upward curve, that's a great signal for us.
Awesome.
Probably the only ones disappointed right now, the NCAA, are losing some of their high draw cards, but that's a credit to yourself and the team. Thank you. Congratulations again,
Thanks,
mate,
guys.
because this is a wonderful thing.
mate.
And
Have a great
talking as
season.
basketball fans, were those dirties still not playing as this thing's happening? You retired a year or two early. But, congratulations. It's unreal. And, of course, jump on the NBL website as well. As all the dates are released, it's going to be huge. NBL.com.au. 3rd straight year, NBA v NBL.